I had always trusted my wife, Emma, and believed our life together was perfect. But one night I caught her laughing with a man in a luxurious restaurant. He was rich, confident, and everything I wasn't. Emma, with her fake smiles and mocking tone, dismissed me like I was nothing. It hurt. It destroyed me. She had fallen for Richard, a powerful businessman who took what he wanted, and she left me without hesitation. I spent weeks wallowing in anger, confusion, and humiliation, but I soon realized I couldn't let them get away with this. I would make them regret everything. I researched Richard, his business dealings, his weaknesses, and formulated a plan. I wouldn't let them walk away unscathed. It was one of those days that felt like the world had flipped on its axis. My routine had been the same for years. Wake up early, head to the office, work hard, return home to Emma. But that night, nothing was the same. I walked into our favorite restaurant, a quiet spot we had often visited to share intimate dinners. But when my eyes met Emma's across the room, I felt an unsettling chill. She wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, his hand casually placed on hers. His smug expression told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just a friend. His name was Richard, and the way he looked at her made my blood boil. I approached their table, trying to keep my composure, but my heart was already racing with anger and betrayal. "Emma," I said, my voice trembling slightly. She looked up, her eyes briefly flickering with surprise, but then she quickly masked it with a cold smile. "Oh, you're here," she said with no warmth. "This is Richard, you know, the guy I've been telling you about." But it wasn't just his presence that crushed me. It was her tone, the way she spoke to me, as though I were an inconvenience, a joke. Richard raised an eyebrow and chuckled, clearly enjoying the discomfort in the air. "So you're the husband," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. Emma laughed lightly, brushing it off. "Oh, don't mind him," she said to Richard. "He's just, well, you know." I stood there, frozen, my chest tight with humiliation. My wife, the woman I had trusted and loved, was making a mockery of me. She turned back to Richard, clearly uninterested in my presence, as if I were nothing more than a ghost in the life I thought was ours. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal of my wife or the way Richard seemed to relish in it. I felt the weight of their laughter, the judgment in Emma's eyes, and I realized something. I was no longer part of her world. I was disposable, and in that moment, everything in me snapped. The days that followed were a blur of rage and disbelief. Emma had moved out within a week. She was with Richard now, the man who had stolen her heart, or at least, that was what she claimed. Her texts were cold, distant, and her visits to pick up her things from the house were more like business transactions than emotional exchanges. I didn't sleep for nights, my mind consumed by thoughts of revenge. I couldn't just let it end like this. I had to make her feel what I felt, what we both had lost. But I wouldn't only focus on her. No, Richard needed to be taught a lesson as well. He had used his wealth and power to strip me of everything, and I would make him pay. I began my research on Richard. He wasn't just some arrogant businessman. He was dangerous. His empire spanned several industries, and he had a reputation for crushing anyone who dared to challenge him. But that didn't matter. He was human. He had weaknesses, and I was going to exploit them. It started small, gathering information about his company, his associates, the people who worked for him. I knew that Richard's world was built on intimidation and fear, and I knew exactly how to use that against him. I didn't need to be a businessman, I just needed to know how to break him. His ego, his pride, they were his greatest vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Emma remained oblivious. She thought I was defeated, that I would slink away and fade into the background of her new life with Richard. But she had no idea who she was dealing with. I had nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. One evening, I sat at my desk staring at the computer screen. I had uncovered a thread, a small but promising lead on one of Richard's less-than-legal business deals. It wasn't much yet, but it was enough. It was enough to begin unraveling his carefully constructed empire. That night, I made the first move. I anonymously tipped off the authorities, planting the seed of doubt in Richard's operations. It wouldn't be enough to bring him down completely, but it would set the stage for everything to come. I could already feel the satisfaction in my bones, the anticipation of watching everything he had worked so hard for start to crumble. As weeks passed, I kept my distance from Emma, letting her believe that I had given up. I could see the photos on social media, Emma and Richard at fancy restaurants, vacations in exotic places. All the while I remained a shadow of her past. But I wasn't broken. I was rebuilding, and this time I wasn't going to make the same mistakes. I would be the one in control. My first move against Richard had been just the beginning. I had gathered more information, dirt, secrets, the kind of things that could destroy his reputation and cost him millions. I discovered illegal contracts, shell companies he'd used to hide shady transactions, and a few enemies who might be willing to testify against him. I had the pieces. All I needed was the right moment. But my focus wasn't just on Richard anymore. Emma, too, needed to understand the consequences of her actions. I knew her well enough to know she would eventually grow bored of Richard, as she always grew bored of everything that wasn't a challenge. He may have had wealth and power, but I had a history with her, a history that she had thrown away without hesitation. And history, as I had come to learn, could be a far more dangerous weapon. I began visiting places Emma used to love, the little cafe down the street, the park where we first met. I wasn't trying to relive the past, I was digging for information. Through mutual friends, I learned Emma was growing frustrated with Richard. The man who had swept her off her feet was beginning to show cracks in his perfect facade. He was controlling, manipulative. His money had bought her for a while, but she wasn't happy. I wasn't sure whether to feel pity for her or to feel triumphant. Either way, I knew she was becoming a pawn in a game she didn't understand. And the best part was, I was the one pulling the strings now. One day, I decided to pay a visit to Richard's company. I didn't walk in with the intention of confronting him directly, but I did need to gather a little more intel. I disguised myself. Simple clothes, nothing that would draw attention. I moved through the building, my eyes scanning for any security weaknesses. Richard had made his empire on fear, but I knew how to make fear my ally. I found what I was looking for, an employee who had grievances with Richard, someone who would talk for the right price. That night, I made contact with him, offering him a deal he couldn't refuse. In exchange for his help in gathering more information on Richard, I promised him a cut of the profits when the company inevitably imploded. He agreed immediately. Another small victory in the war I was waging. The game was in full motion now. Every move I made seemed to have a purpose. Every piece of information I collected, every deal I manipulated, all served one goal: to bring Richard and Emma crashing down. They thought they had won. They thought they were untouchable. But I had learned the art of patience, and revenge, I discovered, was best served cold. Richard's company was sprawling, but there were cracks everywhere. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. It was incredible how much damage one person could do when they had the right leverage. I used my informant inside Richard's company to feed me critical information. Each piece I gathered was like adding another stone to the foundation of his downfall. Meanwhile, Emma was becoming restless. Despite all the luxury, despite all the attention Richard lavished on her, there was something missing. She had made her choice, yes, but the power dynamics in their relationship were already starting to crumble. Richard wasn't the man she thought he was. He was controlling, more interested in her as a trophy than as a person. I could see it now. Emma was beginning to realize the mistake she had made, and it filled me with a twisted satisfaction. It wasn't pity. No, this was something else. I started showing up in places where I knew she'd be, under the guise of a casual encounter, of course. A chance meeting in the city, a conversation at a mutual friend's house. I could see the unease in her eyes. She knew. She could feel the tension in the air, even though I never directly confronted her. She still wore Richard's arm like an accessory, but there was something more hollow about her now. The cracks in her perfect life were showing, and she couldn't hide from them forever. One night I received a call from my inside man at Richard's company. The tip he gave me was golden. There was an upcoming business deal, a major contract that would secure Richard's position for years to come. But there was a catch. Richard had been hiding key information from his partners, including some illegal dealings that could land him in serious trouble if exposed. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. If I played my cards right, I could destroy him completely and leave him with nothing but a ruined reputation. I didn't hesitate. I made the call to the right authorities, giving them the tip anonymously. It was calculated. Richard would never know where the leak came from. By the time he realized what had happened, it would be too late. The deal would fall through, and his partners would turn against him. He would lose everything. Emma, though, I wasn't done with her yet. I still had a few more tricks up my sleeve. Her role in this wasn't as clear-cut as Richard's, but she had played a part in my destruction. She had willingly walked away from everything we had for a life of luxury, and now I was going to make sure she felt the consequences of that choice. I would make her regret not just leaving me, but leaving me for someone like him. The storm was rising. The walls were closing in on both of them, and they didn't even see it yet. The storm I had carefully orchestrated began to unfold. Richard's business empire, once untouchable, started to crack. The deal I had sabotaged sent shockwaves through the company. The board members, once loyal to him, began to question his leadership. His partners, smelling weakness, turned their backs. It wasn't just a business failure, it was the beginning of his downfall. Meanwhile, Emma was becoming more unsettled. The luxurious life she had thought was her escape from a life of normality was now proving to be her prison. Richard was no longer the charming, powerful figure who had swept her off her feet. He was angry, controlling, paranoid. He had started to question everything around him, including her. I knew she was regretting her decision, but she would never admit it. I began to see her more frequently in social circles. Not because I was following her, no, I was still very much in control of the situation, but because she couldn't avoid me anymore. The casual meetings I had set up were slowly breaking through her facade of happiness. She looked different now. Tired, restless, and above all, guilty. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had betrayed herself. I saw it in her eyes when she tried to avoid my gaze, the flicker of recognition that her perfect world was starting to crumble. But that wasn't enough. I couldn't stop yet. Emma needed to know the full extent of her mistake. I had already dealt a crushing blow to Richard's business, but it was time for him to feel something more personal. I had been gathering dirt on him for months. Personal details, secret affairs, financial misconduct. He had been hiding his darkest secrets from everyone, but I knew how to expose them. And now, with the right leverage, I would take him down completely. I made the decision to take it a step further. Richard's biggest weakness was his reputation. He thrived on power, on the image of the perfect businessman who had it all. But I knew what it would take to shatter that illusion. I reached out to the press, anonymously providing them with the evidence I had gathered. Scandals, dirty deals, and affairs. Everything that would ruin him. The media exploded with headlines, and the public turned on him. His pristine image was obliterated. Emma, caught in the aftermath, could only watch as everything Richard had worked for came crashing down. The man she had chosen over me had now become the very thing she had tried to escape. Weak, broken, and desperate. But it wasn't enough yet. Emma needed to face the reality of her choices. Richard was finished. The media had sunk their teeth into his life, exposing every secret, every lie he had ever told. The fallout was swift. His wealth, his connections, his so-called empire, all of it was in shambles. But that wasn't enough. Not for me. I could see Emma starting to feel the pressure. Her world was collapsing around her. and with Richard's public disgrace, her place in his life was uncertain. The wealthy lifestyle she had traded everything for was slipping through her fingers. I had orchestrated this from the shadows, manipulating every step of the way, but now it was time to make her face the consequences of her actions directly. I had already set the stage. Emma had started coming to me in private, seeking comfort. The facade she had built with Richard was fading. She wasn't happy with him, and she was starting to see how wrong she had been. I could see the guilt in her eyes every time we crossed paths, the way she avoided my gaze, the way she tried to justify what she had done. But no excuse would ever be enough. Not for me. I decided to meet her. Not in the usual spots, but somewhere where she wouldn't expect it. A small, quiet bar we used to visit when things were still good between us. When I saw her walk in, her expression was a mixture of sadness and shame. She didn't want to be there, but she had no choice. She was trapped, and she knew it. I watched her approach. She sat down across from me, her eyes full of regret, but also something else. Something I couldn't quite place. "I didn't know what I was doing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I never thought it would end like this." I leaned back in my chair, my gaze cold. "You never thought about me. You never thought about what this would do to me." Her eyes flickered with pain, but she didn't argue. "I was looking for something. Something more. Something better. I thought Richard could give me that. I thought he was everything. But he wasn't, was he?" I replied, my voice laced with venom. "No, Emma, he's just like everyone else. He used you, just like you used me. And now you're left with nothing." She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything to make it right. But there was no redemption for her. Not for what she had done, not for walking away, for throwing away everything we had for a fleeting fantasy. And Richard? He was nothing now. The man who had once stood at the pinnacle of wealth and power was reduced to rubble. His company was on the brink of bankruptcy. His name dragged through the mud. The authorities were closing in on him for his illegal dealings, and his wealth was quickly dissipating into legal fees. There was no more charm, no more power. He was just a broken man, a casualty of his own greed. But even with all of this, I hadn't fully reached my goal. I needed to make sure they knew, deep down, that what they had done to me would haunt them forever. I needed them to feel the full weight of their betrayal. And I knew exactly how to do it. I walked away from that meeting with Emma, leaving her there, staring after me, helpless. She thought I was done. She thought I had moved on. But the truth was, the final part of my plan was just about to unfold. The pieces of my plan had fallen into place one by one, like a game of chess. Richard's fall from grace wasn't sudden, but it was inevitable. The authorities were hot on his trail, his business partners were now enemies, and the media had savored every ounce of his destruction. But I wasn't done yet. There was one final, delicate maneuver to make. I knew Emma would eventually come crawling back to him, seeking solace in the arms of the man who had once promised her everything. The man who, in the end, could offer her nothing. Richard had no money left to buy her affection, no power to control her. His facade had cracked under the pressure, and now he was just another fallen man. But that didn't mean Emma wouldn't try. She was still holding on to the fragments of the life she had once thought she wanted, the one that had been given to her so easily. The thought of luxury, of comfort, had been too intoxicating. She had thrown away everything we had, our history, our love, because she believed Richard's wealth was the answer. Now, as his world collapsed, she was left with nothing. Emma had no idea how close she was to truly losing everything. I let her think she had a chance to salvage what she could with Richard. I fed her enough hope to make her think she could rebuild, to make her think that maybe she could return to the lifestyle she had so foolishly chosen. But I had orchestrated it perfectly. Richard had no way out. His criminal dealings were too deep, his reputation beyond repair. The final nail in his coffin was already in place, and Emma would feel the sting of his downfall too. I would make sure of it. I reached out to the few remaining people in Richard's circle. I dropped the final bomb, emails, recordings, contracts, all the proof that would obliterate him in a way he never saw coming. His last loyal supporters, those who once saw him as a mentor, were now circling, ready to tear him apart. Emma couldn't escape this. Not this time. Her calls came more frequently. She began to doubt Richard's promises. She started asking questions about his business, his integrity, and I knew then that she was starting to see the cracks in her own choices. She wasn't just regretting leaving me anymore. She was regretting believing in Richard's illusion. The life she thought she had bought was turning out to be more hollow than she could have ever imagined. When Richard's empire crumbled completely, I watched it happen from the shadows. The media circus was relentless. Scandal after scandal. His name was plastered on every news outlet, every front page, every website. His supposed allies abandoned him. Those who had once admired him for his power and wealth now turned on him with the fury of betrayed followers. Richard tried to make a comeback. He attempted to salvage his company by speaking with his partners, but every door he knocked on was shut. The lawsuits piled up, his bank accounts froze, and his private jets, once symbols of his dominance, were grounded. The man who had once dominated every room he entered was now a shadow of himself, desperate and broken. But I wasn't done. I knew Emma would come to me. She had nowhere left to turn. Her marriage to Richard had been nothing more than a transactional agreement, a desperate attempt to escape the mundane. But now that she had lost everything, the money, the status, the fake love, she was left with nothing but the hollow remains of the life she had chosen. The final meeting came, just as I had expected. She contacted me, hoping for some kind of reconciliation, thinking that I might take pity on her. She walked into the cafe, her eyes hollow, her posture slouched with defeat. She had lost all of the brightness she once had, and all that remained was regret. "I've made so many mistakes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know what I was thinking. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. Richard, he's not the man I thought he was." Her words didn't move me. They were just words, empty and meaningless now. The woman who had once been my world was now a stranger. She had betrayed me, and there was no turning back from that. "You think I didn't know that?" I replied coldly. "You think I didn't see the signs? You chose him, Emma. You chose this life, and now you're left with the consequences." She looked down, guilt written all over her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You don't get to apologize anymore. It's over." The finality in my voice was clear. This wasn't about reconciliation. It wasn't about forgiveness. It was about closure. My closure. She had taken everything from me, and now I had taken everything from her. She had left me, humiliated me, and I had made sure she paid for it. I stood up, leaving her sitting there. There was nothing more to say. I had won. But in the silence of the moment, I realized something. Revenge doesn't heal. It doesn't fix what's broken. I had taken everything from her and Richard, but in the end I still felt hollow. The storm had passed, but the damage was done. There was no satisfaction in watching them fall. There was no joy in their suffering. Only emptiness. And as I walked away, I understood something profound. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about making someone else suffer. It's about realizing that the only way to truly win is to let go and walk away from the past.